I'm in Concord and find myself here, down at the bottom of the hill at the end of Pleasant Street, I try to picture where it used to be. Used to be right here. The train depot. At the time, I thought it was the most beautiful building in New Hampshire. And then one day in the early 60s, it was gone. And all the railroad tracks, too. Gone. Concord was the perfect place for railroad trains. It was the center of the state, and of course the railroad followed the river there, because that's where the fewest hills were.
The division point for was the home office for the Concord Railroad, the Northern Railroad of New Hampshire, their subsidiaries, eventually Boston and Maine, when Boston and Maine took over those two. In between that was a Concord Montreal, and it was not quite a train a minute, but down near it, in terms of things that were coming in from all directions, and then in between that were the freights.
Back in the 19th century, railroad building just exploded. In Concord, it grew so fast that they built no fewer than 4 depots here on the same spot, each about 10 years apart, until this last one. And this depot was built by
Bradford Lee Gilbert. He was an architect who was trained in New York and worked in New York. He was actually 32 years old at the time that he designed and built this station, and he had been in practice only 3 years, which was pretty remarkable. But he developed a tremendous portfolio of train stations and did them all over the country. It was a magnificent structure for this city. There's probably no comparable building in the city today to that train station. In the year that this station was built, in 1885, Mr. Gilbert, when he approached this problem, was following sort of the picturesque, eclectic approach to design that had prevailed throughout the 19th century. We have a building that's got Renaissance, Romanesque, Moorish, all thrown together to create a very picturesque kind of composition.
They raised the Concord Depot in 1961. And aside from some photographs in the New Hampshire Historical Society, it was, for all intents and purposes, forgotten. That is, until...
In the course of my work, I run into a lot of old buildings, old attics, young people discovering old buildings, young people discovering old attics. And one of my clients this year found this remarkable little treasure trove in their carriage house. In going over them, I was just astonished. We have a complete set of working drawings for this magnificent building. The oldest set of working drawings I've ever seen. They just weren't retained. So here we have probably 300 or 400, some site drawn, some from the Architects Broadway, New York City office.
Bradford Gilbert's working drawings, not just blueprints. Look at the detail. What craftsmanship it must have taken to create a building like this.
At the time this was built, Concord had a number of stone cutters, stone carvers, bricklayers, stonemasons that were familiar with the time-honored way of stacking blocks, stacking bricks, know how a keystone works, that sort of thing. We've lost that. In order to build a building like this, we'd essentially have to train an army of workers to get it. And again, the assumption was you throw this sketch out and there's 100 guys in West Concord that know how to get this effect. And there it is, they got it. They didn't need to be held by the hand. They didn't need reams of drawings, specs, and technical documents. That was sort of a matter of course. Sure, it was a more expensive building, but it wasn't any more extravagant than half of what was lining both sides of Main Street at the time.
The railroad station was embedded in the community. It was a prominent feature of the community, and it expressed some of the things that were inherent in the American psyche. Travel, movement, communication and connection. And it symbolized all those things, and that's one of the reasons why these buildings became as grand as they were. They were the temples, in a way, of the mid-19th century.
A lot of fond memories that I have of the Concord Depot that are shared by a lot of people my age that from this area that still haven't forgiven the railroad for tearing it down, but perhaps overriding that might be pleasure in the fact that I can remember the Concord Depot.